So it starts really with that research, understanding what you're selling and to whom, who gets the benefit, finding them, and then going to those people with that message.
Hello Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast Live. In this episode, which is recorded at the Sales Innovation Expo in partnership with HubSpot, we have John Hazel. He is a sales expert, and he's sharing with us how we can improve our cold outreach and get better results. You can find out more about John over at rocketism.com, and that is rocketism.com. Everything else we talk about is available in the show notes of this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with all that said, let's jump into today's show. John,
Hiya.
Welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you very much indeed. Good to be here.
I'm glad to have you on, mate. So we're going to talk about cold outreach today.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of companies here focused on different elements of cold outreach. We can get thoughts and opinions, not necessarily on the companies, but on cold outreach as a method of bringing in new business, for sure. But I want to start playing devil's advocate slightly.
Of course.
So there's also a lot of companies here, especially on the marketing side of the Sales Innovation Expo, that are all about content marketing, all about inbound marketing. Clearly, content is super important in where we are in the internet age.
Of course.
Does that offset the need for outbound cold outreach over email, phone, whatever it is? Is that taking it off the table for us salespeople, or do we still need to do it?
No, it hasn't taken off the table. I think as with all things, as we develop and new techniques come along and audiences shift in terms of what they do and the way that they respond to outreach, particularly, there's a place for everything. And I think that the cold outreach, is a part of that overall package. I think the difficulty is that with everything else potentially looking really new and sexy and exciting, that puts more strain on the advertising or the marketing sales budget, which is understandable. So people have got to start making choices. And I think possibly the biggest fear that I would have is that because most people don't actually like prospecting and cold outreach, they don't like doing it, then it's very easy for it to fall down the priority line. And that's something that I'd like to really change and make sure that people keep their eye on that particular ball.
For sure. So we'll come on to why people don't like it, whether they are the right people to be doing it in the first place.
Indeed. Good.
And then perhaps some practical takeaways and elements of how we can improve our own cold outreach. We'll come to that at the end of the show.
Of course.
But before that, is it becoming more important, do you think? And I'll frame this question up from my perspective, there's way more noise than ever before. Mm-hmm. And so I think content marketing, things like that, unless it's like incredible, which a lot of it is rubbish.
Yep.
You're just adding to the noise. So is cold outreach an opportunity to proactively break through that noise? And so does it have a space in our sales, prospecting and pipeline generation for that very reason?
I think it does. And I think the reason that it does, or the background to making sure that it does, should I say, is the research that you do in the first place. It's not actually what you say when you outreach, of course, is very important, but it's only ever as good, the results are only ever as good as the research that you do at the start of the process. Get that bit wrong, and it doesn't matter what you tell somebody, it just becomes more noise. If you actually determine what it is that you have that's a benefit, and therefore you know who's going to get the most from that benefit, and you can then find those individuals, it's not irrelevant communication. And if it's not irrelevant, then it stands out, and people sit up and take notice, and you get engagement. So it starts really with that research, understanding what you're selling and to whom, who gets the benefit, finding them, and then going to those people with that message.
So I don't know, there's obviously data out there on this, and I don't know if you know any of it, and I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you for numbers or anything, but there seems to be a lot of the sales space, and it's mainly tech startups that are doing this, that are doing outbound cold email with no context and are happy with a 1 or 2% response rate. From my perspective, I've never understood this, because clearly you're burning through your potential customers.
Yep.
And I know when people outreach to me, and they totally get it wrong because I've got no budget to spend money on anything, but I'm the managing director of a small business in the UK, clearly with the Salesman Podcast and everything we're doing here. I get outreach and it's just spam. And I know that whether it's subconsciously, I'm never going to deal with that person ever again because I know that they've not made any efforts. They don't care about me enough, seemingly they don't care about enough about me to make any effort. And so I just, again, whether it's subconsciously or not, I just ignore them from that point onwards. So Is there a benefit to this spamming? Does the economics of it work out over the longer term when you're getting that 1-2% reply rate, or should we always be focusing on relevant context, and every email that we send, we should be expecting an email back?
Okay, the thing that really matters here, and in fact for this to work, there are three key elements. Firstly is the ability to be able to identify who the target is. Okay, so that's the first thing. And if you don't get that right, as I was saying before, then the whole thing is going to fail. The second part is having an addressable market that's large enough to warrant this type of activity. So to be ridiculous, if you only had one potential client who was going to give you an infinite amount of revenue, you wouldn't use this type of tool to engage with them. And the third thing, which really is relevant to your question, is the lifetime value of a new client, and to be sure that that they can give a decent return on the investment incurred in bringing them on board. Now, if your lifetime value is very small, then your cost of acquisition also needs to be small, and therefore doing little research or buying lists that broadly cover the kind of audience that you want to talk to might make economic sense. But you're right, you get an awful lot of waste, and you need to have a massive addressable market to be able to keep that up. If, however, your lifetime value is larger and you've got maybe a slightly more niche, and when I say niche, I'm not talking about hundreds, I'm still talking about a large addressable market, then that's when you get to the stage whereby it's more expensive to find them if you're going to find them well and properly. Therefore, your cost of acquisition goes up. Therefore, by definition, you have to be far more accurate in the way that you go about things to make sure that you don't burn those prospects who are genuinely live prospects. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that balance between size of addressable market and the lifetime value of a new client is really important. And to the point whereby if you're selling, taking it to sort of almost an extreme, if you're selling to multi-million pounds worth of strategic investment to a large organization, the likelihood is that you probably know those organizations already. You know who they're likely to be, and you'll have done a lot of research on them. So it's less likely that you're going to conduct cold outreach. It's when you start to get in the middle, or I suppose the other element is when you've got a structure in a business, and this is quite often these days, where you've got very flat structures within organizations, and you don't necessarily have the resource to be able to execute that level of decent research to find the right target. Someone needs to do it, and if you don't do it, you end up putting out spam to a lot of people for whom it has no relevance.
Amazing. Because the reason I asked this, and I'm totally on board with this, but you just give the audience context. So if they are selling a crazy high value B2B product, they shouldn't be spamming, right? But
Absolutely.
if you're at that lower end, which is fine, and I'm sure there's commissions that are great there as well in that role for anyone listening who is there, then perhaps that is more relevant. And the reason I asked that is just to almost bait that kind of answer to give the audience context of the rest of the conversation. So you've mentioned research. Let's get real practical here. So for anyone who's listening to this, driving to the next sales meeting, or perhaps driving to the office, they're going to just about to do a whole bunch of outbound prospecting today. What research do we need to be doing other than the super obvious of name, the title, I guess, and your company size?
Okay, geography, really, really important, and obviously verticals that are going to be associated with your product. But outside of that, there's a couple of other things that you can take into consideration. I mean, we use all kinds of different ways of getting information on individuals, but something that we found is really useful is if, let's say, you're going for a CEO, see where they've come from. And I don't mean by their job, by their company, I mean by their job. So have they become CEO through an operational route, or have they become CEO through a marketing route or an HR route? Because that individual then will have a very different take on how they look at your particular business. So if you're selling something that's operational, but you need to go in at the very top of a company, find the CEO who's come up through an operational background, and it'll have more resonance with them. That's really what makes the difference. And you'll be able to tell them what you do in fewer words, and fewer words is always better.
And how important is, I know it's important, but how important, to give everyone context of this, is the messaging in that initial cold outreach? So what you described then of, if you know a CEO has a sales background, you can perhaps use sales language, you can perhaps talk about things differently. Perhaps they might appreciate you coming to them as a salesperson versus if they are from an operations background, they might have the stereotype of the salesperson in the back of their mind. how, I guess, and we can go on to perhaps some practical examples of this, but how important is that messaging? Because
Okay. The first thing that's important is to understand this is not a marketing campaign.
yeah,
It's not even a sales campaign. All right? And people get very, very confused with those. This is a bit like taking a look at a job description and a CV and saying, would I give this person the first interview? And the best approach that you can take is by making sure that that match is correct and then really focusing in on a single benefit. Do not tell them how you do things. Nobody cares. And they certainly don't care when they're receiving that first bit of communication. They may well care when you engage with them and you're explaining why you're preferential to your competitors or something like that. But at this stage, nobody cares how you do stuff. What they want to know is what's in it for me. And when I say me, I really mean me, not even my company.
Mm-hmm. So what's an example of that?
So if you can highlight, so the structure of outreach that we use is very simple, and it basically is in 3 stages. The first is salutation.
Yep.
The second, so after salutation, 3 stages, identify single issue or opportunity. So basically, how can we help you with something in terms of creating an opportunity, maximizing an opportunity, or getting rid of a pain that you have.
And again, just to drill it down and down, what would be, even for yourself, what would be an example of that?
Okay, if let's say you were selling into retail, and you were selling into retail at a time when minimum wage comes through, or living wage came through, okay, that's going to be a little bit of a double-edged sword to this, of course, because if everyone's talking about it, you lose your ability to stand out. But if you can talk about something like that and just mention it in that first sentence, it'll grab someone's attention. In fact, people don't really read the mail at all. What they do is they look at it and they pull out a few key words. If they see a few key words that give them some confidence in it's worth spending their time actually reading it, they may do. The biggest thing is to make sure that you've got a couple of words that you know that individual is going to recognize as having relevance to them. So it could be, if you're selling into financial services, talking about some new compliance regulation that needs to come in. It could be that if you're talking to an e-commerce person, you're talking about making sure that you get customer retention or being able to grow your addressable market. So making sure that you find the right words that individual is going to recognize as being appropriate to them, and then making sure that they then read on from that.
So I think we could probably spend about 2 hours talking about this specifically, and I don't want to just come off it for a second, because how do we know if we're dealing with a CFO, and we don't have a background in finance, in accounting or anything like that as the sales professional? How do we suss out what is important to them? Is it a case of going to our current best customers and asking what's important to them, or is there a way to go about it?
I would hope, if you're a professional salesperson, you'd know the benefit that your product offers. And I'd like to think...
not the benefit of the product, but how it relates to that individual. So like a higher level conversation versus features and benefits.
Okay, fine. Okay. Don't get overly complex. You can ask your customers. I would have thought your marketing department as well would be able to help in terms of, what's the need that we're, or the gap that we're filling here. And then keep it really simple. Keep it really, really simple. Like I say, highlight very simply what it is, the benefit that you can offer. Follow that up with some credibility as to why you have the authority to be able to make the statement that you can help them, and then a single call to action. And only one benefit. Never repeat it in follow-up mails. Only ever then ask for the call to action. And keep asking for that.
And should our call to action be 99% of the time to get on a phone call?
Ultimately, what this is doing in many ways is replacing that cold call. Because we're all brilliant at not answering our phones, aren't we? I mean, we're just superb at it, And the gatekeeper system has changed dramatically as well, and all of these sorts of things. So, and actually talking about gatekeepers, that's another thing that's really important as well. Remember, if you're talking to larger organisations and senior people, they may well have a PA or an assistant or someone else who's actually filtering a lot of their mail. So it might mean you need to talk to them on a few more occasions to get past them. And think about how you would like to receive content from somebody else. What's going to make you turn around and say, I'll give this guy or this woman 10 minutes of my time? And keep it short, Keep it simple. Don't attach a load of marketing collateral to it, because it doesn't matter. All it'll end up doing is potentially putting you into the TLDR box.
Yep.
And the TLDR box is too long, didn't read. And we all do it. You know yourself, you open a mail, and if you can't see it all on your screen, whether it's your mobile screen or your laptop, then the likelihood is that you'll dump it if you don't know who it's from. So it really needs to be short. It needs to be to the point. Don't worry about it being human. You know, don't make it all dressed up so it looks like you're trying to make a point.
Yeah.
You know, write to them as if you're writing to a friend. Make it human. Make it something that feels as though you've taken the time to find them. You know, don't be afraid to use, you know, emotional words. You know, it'd be great to do this, or I'd love to do that. You know, these things are fine, because as soon as it starts getting really starchy, the brain immediately tells us, well, actually, this wasn't written by this individual.
Why are we typically, I'm talking about the collective of B2B sales professionals here, and you know, the 20, 30,000 people who listen to this audio, and everyone on the video. Why do we act corporate over things like email? Because you don't do it necessarily in person. You might be dressed corporately, but after 5-10 minutes of conversation, all that disappears typically.
Yeah.
Why do we do it over email?
Because we feel people can reread it. We don't want to get anything wrong. We want to feel that it's perfect. You know, you're afraid your boss is going to look at it and say, "What, you put the word I'd love to talk to you?" And then, how can you say that? We're a professional organisation. But actually, that's what makes the difference. It's those kinds of things that make the difference. Make it personal. Make it warm. Make it funny. You know, make it so that you're challenging a little bit. And consider as well the layout of the text, because as I said earlier, people are just looking at it first up. So if it's a one paragraph, again, it's lost all its impact.
Yeah.
If it's you know, if you can do something where you've got a short paragraph and then 2 words on their own and then a short paragraph again, and when I say short, I mean a line or 2, then that just encourages you to look further. So look at things visually as well, but make it human.
Yeah.
Make it human.
Makes sense.
And you know, I often say it's a bit like I don't know. Let's say you're at an event like this, and there's someone you know you'd really like to talk to because you believe you can benefit their business, and they're just walking out to get their cab. The cab's actually on the doorstep waiting for them. So you really do. It's not an elevator pitch. You really have no time, but you tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, John, I know you're just catching your cab. I've got something that I'd really like to talk to you about because I think it's going to help your business. Is it okay if we have a chat on Wednesday afternoon?" That's what this is doing. That's all it is. It's no more than that.
So could you say this is warming up the cold phone call, essentially?
What it's doing is it's encouraging your target to self-qualify themselves as having a level of interest in your business. So I can't imagine how many calls I've made in the last 12 months. I haven't made a single cold call yet. Every single individual that I've spoken to, and probably averaging 5 to 10 calls a day, has requested my conversation with them. And that, of course, what that does, that alleviates all of that pressure that people feel about making that initial outreach, you know, making that cold call, or even writing that email. So maybe, depending on the size of your organization, it's good to get someone else to do it. So that you don't even see the negative responses. That's a really motivational thing if you only ever see the positive responses.
Yeah.
So
someone else is hugely demotivated because they're seeing all the negative ones.
Well, if I would say this, wouldn't I? But of course, if you put it out of the business, then they shouldn't be emotional about it. It's a job.
Yeah.
And if you outsource it as well, they don't have that emotion that starts to say, well, you know, have we got this wrong? Or I've done 5 and no one's responded. The data must be rubbish. You know, always finish the list.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that people recognise. Kind of goes back to what we were saying right at the start. That people understand where they sit as to how they need to use this form of outreach. You know, what's their company size? What resource do they have? You know, why give the prospecting to the salesperson? They're probably the least equipped to do it. But for some reason, in my background as well, it's become the salesman's job, unless you really are large enough and you can split it out.
Yeah.
Or it could be the inventor or the CEO of a startup who's trying to do it, who's actually brilliant at a keyboard, but isn't going to be great at this. However, if someone says, look, I'm interested in learning more, then they can talk about their product forever and will sell it better than anybody else. So use the right tools in the right places based on your business, based on the size of your organization, based on the value that you have of a lifetime customer, and use those tools to determine whether this is the right way of going about
So
things.
final thing on this, John, and I don't know if there's a dead straight line answer to this, but what or how many times should we email and follow up before, as you kind of, and you're the first person on the show to say this, so congrats on this, but if someone hasn't replied after the 45th email, they're probably disqualifying themselves enough that you should focus somewhere else. So where is the line between they know who you are, but they've just not had a minute to reply, and so you need to keep following up, versus they've disqualified themselves?
Really tough. Of course it is. You're right. There isn't, and there's all sorts of different schools of thought. Some people will say 3 is enough. Some will say 5. Some will say 10. I've seen. And it is difficult. I think again, part of it depends on who you are and what your business, how you like your business to be represented. So none of us want our business to be seen as being pestering. But none of us would mind our business looking as though we're persistent and passionate about our product. So it is a fine line. We tend to work on 5 touches. And they're very specific in what they do. Each email does a different job. Individually, they don't make a massive amount of difference, but cumulatively, they do make a difference. And they're specifically designed to get to that endpoint of someone replying. And I'd rather somebody replies and says no than doesn't reply at all. So when you get to the end of your campaign, make sure you tell people it's the last time you're contacting them. It gives them a chance to actually say, well, I was never interested. Even ask them a question, am I wasting my time? I'd rather someone wrote back and said, yes, you're wasting your time. It's better than having no response at all.
I guess you're cutting people off as well, and you're giving people like, this is it, this is the end.
Yes.
And so I know from my experience with a lot of this, I get a lot of emails when I send something similar saying, yeah, I was going to get back to you in the morning, and if you hadn't sent that email, you would have not got a response for another 6 weeks.
Exactly.
So give that being definitive of it, I think, is super important.
And finally, on this, on sort of how many and timing, there are 2 jobs going on. So once you've done your research and you found your targets, the initial cold outreach is a prospecting tool. Okay, it's to get quick results. It's to bring people on board rapidly. But of course, don't forget, you've built a great database in the process. So don't throw it away. Then reuse it, remarket to those people. Instead of doing 5 emails in 5 weeks, maybe you're doing 10 emails in a year, because they might not be quite ready to buy at the point that you're going to them, but they might be ready in 6 months' time. So change the tack, make it more content related, more newsworthy, just to keep yourself front of mind. And so when the timing is right, then they're likely to come back to you. So there really are the two quite distinct elements to this that can be getting benefits that can be gained by doing the good research in the first place.
Definitely. And I guess that ties back to what we said at the very beginning of the interview of not burning through everyone, not spamming the heck out of everyone. And then you get the benefit of this list of people that may or may not be relevant for you in the next kind of 2, 3, 4 years going forward.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, I get clients ringing me up, honestly, out of the blue, saying, look, we spoke 18 months ago. Timing's right. When do we go? And that feels like a free one. It's great when that happens. So don't lose sight of that. And even for today, for instance, we're down here at the expo, and last week we actually sent a mail out, just one email, to every single person we've ever emailed to that has never replied, and we've picked up business as a result of it. So if you've got opportunities to do that, then use it. But be careful. There is a fine line between, but if you don't ask, you know what? Very rare that you get.
I love it. With John, I've got one final question.
All right.
Ask everyone that comes on the show. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I know what it is. And it's that I would split the prospecting and outreach from the selling. Simple as that.
Okay, let me rephrase that then. When did you know that this was? When did you realize that? Because clearly that's happening throughout organizations of SDRs and account managers, and the split that's going on now. It's trendy at the moment for sure.
Yep.
When did you realize that was key?
I realized it when I had startup businesses, and I'd be sat with my business partner having a coffee or a drink, saying, "Do you know what? This is brilliant. We've got a great product. We've got some fabulous clients that really like it. If only there was more coming in the top." Well, why isn't there more coming in the top? Well, because I'm account managing the clients that we've got already, or we're trying to develop this, or we're trying to do something else. And you know what? I don't like doing it. And I think that my previous background was quite a lot about account management, really, rather than selling. And I'm absolutely convinced that by splitting these two roles, you get much, much better results, and it's more efficient and it's more cost effective. So you win on every single level.
Amazing stuff. Well, with that, John, tell Sales Nation, everyone listening and watching, where we can find out more about you and everything that you're doing.
Yeah, of course you can. So I'm John Hazel. I'm co-founder of Rocketism, and you can find us at rocketism.com.
Amazing stuff. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with all that said, I want to thank you for joining us.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure.